It's time for another Matchbox Thomas Friends video. This is the fourth video in the series, and so if this is your first time viewing one of these videos, I've linked a playlist so you can view the whole series. For those of you who have watched the earlier videos, I'm sure you know how these go. I take several characters from the series and model them in Blender, replicating the style of the Matchbox toys of the 1970s and 1980s. With that, it's time to make a start. I'm sure you know by now, if you're familiar with the series, that each of these videos represents a different wave of releases in this hypothetical toy line. Given that my idea is that the range began in 1985, Wave 4 would have seen a release in 1988. Given that there was a gap of over 5 years between the second and third seasons of Thomas & Friends, I need to space out the releases if I want this range to have had new releases every year. In terms of the characters introduced in Season 2, I've already made Duck for Wave 2 and Diesel for Wave 3. Donald and Douglas, therefore, will be the major release for Wave 4. Donald and Douglas, like Thomas, Toby, Duck and Diesel, used the chassis originally designed for the pannier tank engine in Matchbox's standard range. I began working on the model by taking elements from both Thomas and Duck. Incidentally, during the early part of this video you may notice that the proportions on the model change every now and then. Basically, I ended up having to make two models at first. After making the last Matchbox video, I switched to a new computer and had to set up both Blender and OBS again. When I first started modelling Donald / Douglas, I neglected to pay attention to OBS's recording window, and I'd accidentally set it so that the OBS window was visible on top of Blender, making that footage unusable. So I restarted the model from scratch. But when I got to modelling the cab windows, Blender decided it would be really funny if it crashed, and me, being the idiot that I am, forgot to save. So after that, I went back to the first model I did, making sure to save my progress after doing literally anything at all, which, incidentally, is also what I do when I play old first-person shooters. As I make more and more characters in the range, it becomes a quicker process to make new ones, since I've essentially accumulated a library of components that I can use for future engines and rolling stock. As such, many of the elements of the Donald and Douglas model are taken from either Thomas or Duck, resized and modified accordingly. Having said that, there are some completely newly made parts as well, such as the smokebox wing plates and the splashes. There is one character in this video that will be pretty much entirely original, but we'll get to that character when we get to them. The tender is pretty much a wholly original piece. Donald and Douglas are known for having long, low-sided tenders, and so the fairly squat tender chassis I've used for the other tender engines wouldn't really suit them. Therefore, I've made a new chassis. Once the tenders were complete, it was time to add textures. I made Donald's first, before cloning the whole model and making a new set of textures for Douglas. Those of you familiar with these videos will know that I like to save the final renders for the end of the video, so stay tuned if you want to see them. At this point, the only rolling stock I've made for the Matchbox Thomas range are Annie, Clarabelle and Henrietta. The reason I prioritise them over unnamed rolling stock is because Matchbox already have coaches and trucks in their non-Thomas range. However, I knew it was only a matter of time before I'd have to make a troublesome truck, and a little variety never hurt anyone. Originally, I was going to use the same chassis as Annie and Clarabelle, originating from the non-Thomas Matchbox coach. But it was pretty long, even for a 7-plank wagon. I kind of knew this going in, But then I remembered that I'd just made a new chassis for Donald and Douglas's tender, which, with slight modifications, would probably work quite well for a troublesome truck. From that point onwards, there isn't a huge amount to talk about. A troublesome truck is basically just an open-topped cuboid. I added the frames around the sides of the truck, and, like Toby in the previous instalment, I added ridges around the sides of the truck to give the illusion of it being constructed out of planks. One thing I did want to add was a play feature, similar to the pre-existing Matchbox tipper wagon, and so I gave the truck a door that opens on one side. I soon added a face, and with that, the troublesome truck was complete. Given that Donald and Douglas are now in the Matchbox range, it makes sense to have the spiteful brake van as well. He only appeared in one episode and, interestingly, if this range was real, it would be the spiteful brake van's only contemporary merchandise release. The first merchandise this character got was the wooden railway toy in 1999, and that was based on his Railway series design. The only merchandise the van got based on his TV series design were Ertl in the early 2000s and Bachmann in the late 2010s. I figured that the spiteful brake van should get some love in the Matchbox range. With the increase in goods wagon variation, it makes sense to have a brake van, and I think such a toy would sell better if it was based on a character. At this point in the timeline, Toad hasn't appeared in the TV series yet, and so the spiteful brake van is the only brake van character to have appeared in the show at this point. Even if he was destroyed at the end of his own episode, it makes sense to have toys of him. Whereas I deemed the troublesome trucks too small to use the Matchbox passenger coach chassis, I figured that the spiteful brake van was just about the right size. Like with Toby and the troublesome trucks, I used ridges around the body to give off the illusion of plank construction. Now, the spiteful brake van never received any 2D key art back in the day. In fact, I believe the only piece of key art ever created for the character was the image created for the Ertl toy. As such, I can't just take a pre-existing piece of artwork and use it for the brake van's face, and so I drew one myself. Interestingly, when the spiteful brake van appeared in the magazines, his face was replaced with a crudely drawn troublesome van face, even though the original artwork implies the illustrations originally included a more accurate face, so I'm not sure what's going on there. But now that the spiteful brake van is complete, it's time to move on to the final character. Told you there'd be a character built more or less from the ground up. After modelling Bertie in the previous wave, I figured I might as well model another non-rail vehicle. Now all of the vehicle characters from Season 1 are accounted for. I couldn't feasibly reuse assets from any of the earlier Matchbox characters to make Terence, hence why he is pretty much scratch built. I had Thomas in the scene to begin with, but that was only for size reference. Once Terence's bonnet was blocked in, I decided to add his running board. Then came his wheels, the only asset to be reused, albeit modified, from a pre-existing character in the Matchbox range. As with some of the pre-existing Terence merchandise, only the two axles at the end actually turn round, with the middle wheels just being a moulded part of the chassis. I gave Terence a coupling in place of his hook. I made it a loop, even though in hindsight it maybe should have been a hook coupling. My thinking was that it would be cheaper to manufacture if it wasn't a moving part. After adding the face, I decided to work on Terence's cab area. Following this came his exhaust stack, and then the frames around his wheels. He was really starting to take shape now. Then came time to make his famous caterpillar tracks, which make Terence stand out next to the other non-rail characters in Thomas and Friends. The final touch was adding a bit of engine detail to the open areas of his bonnet, which are mostly just differently arranged cubes and cylinders. And, with that said and done, it's time to have a look at the final renders. And there we are, another set of characters for the Matchbox Thomas and Friends range that never was. I hope you've enjoyed this revisit of the hypothetical toy line, and that you're eager to see who's next when I make a part 5. Like I said at the start of the video, I've made a playlist of all the Matchbox Thomas videos, so if you're new, feel free to check them out, and if you're not new, feel free to give them another watch. But thanks again for watching, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next week for another video.